Formula One Focus. What an exciting weekend of racing in Brazil. Probably one of the best I've seen. It's a bit unpredictable, everything. But Indrek, you've seen many, you've attended many. For me, one of the best ever.
Oh, absolutely. Hi, nice to be with you again. It's always a brilliant venue that Interlagos circuit in Sao Paulo. As you said, I've been there before. I attended the 2006 and the 2007 race. That's a different discussion, but those were memorable in their own rights. And obviously, this last weekend's Grand Prix was one of the best, I think. Well, the best, I think, of the season, but certainly one of the best ever. In terms of the driver skills that we saw, in terms of the swing in the championship, in terms of the nail biters, nail biting element, the unpredictability. Obviously, the weather was the major factor. We had qualifying on Sunday morning. The guys had to be there at like 4 o'clock or something in the morning, local time, and not a lot of time in between qualifying and the race. So everything played a role in giving us one of the best Grand Prix in recent memory, anyway.
The funny thing you just mentioned, the unpredictability made it exciting. And the first question I want to ask you is the commentators in F1 TV kept referring to it as Super Sunday. Isn't this maybe a way forward? I know it puts a lot of pressure on the teams, to qualify in the morning and race in the afternoon. If anything goes wrong in the morning, like you saw with Albon's Williams, they couldn't repair it in time. But it gives so much more excitement on race day, doesn't it?
Well, I think that was I don't have F1 TV. I have to depend on Sky Sports F1 to watch my races. But anyway, so I don't know what they said. I don't think that's a good idea at all. I mean, this was an exception. It was forced on them because they couldn't qualify. They couldn't do their full schedule on the Saturday because of the weather. And yes, it did introduce an element of jeopardy that we don't normally see. But to have that as the regular thing, there's no particular reason to change the schedule to accommodate qualifying on the Sunday morning and the race the Sunday afternoon. There's no particular reason to do that. Yes, there's a lot of action or lack of Formula One action in the morning and leading up to the Grand Prix itself, but that's only the morning, and there are normally supporting events, the Porsche Super Cups and other, single-seater events. They vary depending on the venue where you are, but there's still a lot of track action before the Formula One race anyway. So there's no particular reason to say that, we've got to fill that time, and we fill that time with a qualifying. I think it works absolutely brilliantly the way it does at the moment. I'm still not quite convinced about the sprint, but the sprint seems to be here, for the foreseeable future, so we have to live with that. But there's plenty of action on the Friday, competitive action on the Friday. There's competitive action on the Saturday. There's competitive action, obviously, on the Sunday. I think that works okay. I don't see any need for that to change.
Just as an aside on the sprints that you mentioned now, MotoGP has a sprint every single race. Every weekend where there's a race is a sprint weekend, a sprint race as well. And the interesting thing that they do, you only qualify once and you start in the same position for both races. Isn't that something that maybe Formula One can consider?
Well, you see, the thing is, I mean, we all know that in MotoGP you can actually race and you can actually pass each other, but you can't do the same at, for instance, a track like Monaco. So what are you going to have? You're going to have two processional races. I'm still not convinced that the sprint is a good competitive race, because the guys have to take care. It's so much more complicated, I think. I don't know MotoGP bikes that well, but I think it's so much more complicated to fix a very broken Formula One car than a very broken MotoGP bike. So you need more time for that. So therefore, the drivers are more careful, I think, in normal circumstances. And again, the big thing is they don't have anything really to race for in the sprints. I know we're drifting a little bit off last weekend's race, but I have said from the beginning, and I've written about it, maybe not on this platform, but on other opportunities, let's have a separate sprint championship. You don't have to have a sprint for every race, because at certain venues you can't really have, just a short race and not have a processional race such as Monaco. But if the drivers have something to go for, and you have, let's say, a sprint championship, and you, let's say, put in a junior driver in one of the two cars. So, that is something for everybody to go for, and it makes it worthwhile for them to go for it. I think that would be the better change than to have a sprint at every venue, and on a number of occasions, you will simply end up with processional races, and I don't think that's good for the sport anyway.
Right, let's talk about this race now. It was wet, and you and I discussed this briefly before. There were memorable wet races. There have been memorable wet races in the past, specifically Ayrton Senna, 1993, Donington, Lewis Hamilton, Silverstone, Michael Schumacher, famously the Rainmaster or Regenmeister, or whatever you wanted to call
Yeah,
him. The guy was exceptionally good in the rain. This weekend was no exception, and Max actually made his mark in this specific race. 2016, wasn't it? That
yeah.
also a wet race where he took different lines to everybody else and showed everybody what was coming in terms of Max Verstappen being probably one of the best drivers of all times.
Oh, there's no question about that. Absolutely. He was in a class of one on Sunday. There's no doubt about that. You start 17th. Yes, it's wet. Obviously, that provides a lot of opportunities for people ahead of you to make mistakes. And also, let's not forget, when the race got underway properly, two of the drivers ahead of him on the grid were gone. Both Lance Stroll and Alex Albon. So there were actually only 15 cars ahead of him, but still, he started in 17th position on the grid. So he still had to make up that distance. But to take, effectively 6 places in the first lap in the wet, that is absolutely out of this world. It is just something that very few, if any, other drivers would be able to do. And quite rightly, Chris Horner, compared that with the Ayrton Senna drive in 1993, the European Grand Prix at Donington Park, when he basically he started fourth, he dropped briefly back to fifth, and then made up all the positions to lead the race at the end of the first lap, including the likes of Vendinger and Hill and Alain Prost that he passed. And that is it's called the lap of the gods. And I think this is probably the second lap of the gods in Formula One history, because you're talking about the first lap in the wet when nobody knows where the grip is, where your tires are cold, where your brakes are cold, and you really have to feel your way around. And that shows the feel that Verstappen has. You mentioned in 2016, he did virtually the same thing, and he showed there that his feel for the car, the feel of how much to brake, where to brake, and how to brake and turn in at the same time, virtually in wet conditions. That's his great ability, taking different lines than the normal racing lines where most of the other drivers would stick to them. And that all comes back to the days when these guys were racing each other in wet conditions when they were young in go-kart racing. And that's where you really learn how to feel your way to get around the track the quickest way in the wet. And that's this kind of skill that he possesses and that he's able to bring to the party. I mean, nobody can argue about the quality of his performance on Sunday. That was a world-class performance from a world-class driver.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you how much of this win was luck. So let's start with this race. You said the first lap was probably one of the best laps ever, but we didn't see that much of it because Senna in '93 he was in the lead, so you saw it. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
really. I
yeah.
mean, the director, I think, made a big mistake there. The TV director they should have known that what was Max's only hope to try and minimize the potential damage to his championship hopes, with Norris in pole position and him in 17th position. Max's only possible hope was to get to at least the midfield and close to the front as soon as possible in that race. So they should have followed him. I'm sorry, but they should have.
In terms of just being so wet, I mean, we saw the shots from inside the cars there. There is no way that you can see what's happening right in front of you. A car might have spun across the road. You're just driving blindly and sort of guessing where you should start braking. I mean, that's just absolutely crazy. Isn't it too dangerous to drive in those kind of conditions? So I'm getting a bit sidetracked, but I was really thinking to myself, what are these guys thinking? You're talking about safety cells and driver this and driver that, and you do something like this, which to me is almost suicidal in the sense that you're so blind. The merits of actually continuing the race.
Well, the only time when it becomes I wouldn't say suicidal quite yet, but when it becomes impossible to drive a Formula One car in the wet is when the water is so high on the track surface that it effectively gets to skid along on its skid plate, the car. And when the tires don't have any grip at all anymore, they don't even offer, sometimes, they wouldn't touch. And that's why you get this effect of aquaplaning, When you have aquaplaning, nobody can expect you to try and control the car. So that is a fine balance that they have to take. I mean, these are the 20 best drivers in the world, arguably. And let's not forget that they have a lot of experience in driving in the wet, right from the age of probably 6 or 7 years in all of their cases. So, they are very experienced in this. Yes, the speeds are different, obviously. You're doing 300 k's an hour instead of maybe, I don't know, 80 k's an hour in a go-kart. But that's, relatively, I think that was probably the same thing. But you learn the skills. You learn to find grip. You learn to find the lines where you find the most grip. You learn where to brake, how to brake, and how to keep in control of the car in those conditions when you're braking, where you're turning in, and that sort of thing. Um, I mean, this is Formula One. It's the pinnacle of motorsport, so you can't let it just be stopped because it's raining. When it becomes impossible to control the cars, and let's not forget that the wet tires that they are on are exceptionally good. Uh, if you compare the wet weather tires, and I'm talking about the extreme wet weather tires, the blue wall tires, they displace a stupid amount, tons of water over the course of a lap. Far, far, far better than any road tire that we have on normal road cars. So they do get they do get grip, and they do absolutely amazing speeds through corners and down the straight in those conditions. Yes, they cannot see, but every one of them, they know these circuits off by heart, and they know exactly where to brake and they have markers when you drive down the straight. You have a particular thing that you look out for. That's the marker. Also your gut feel, obviously, with because conditions change with every lap. But they have things that they look out for, and often I think Martin Brundle has explained this. I'm not a Formula One driver, but he has explained it. You often just look at the red light of the car ahead of you, and you just basically just stick with him, and you trust the guy ahead of you that he's not going to do something stupid, and that's the way they go racing. Again, as I say, the only real reason to stop racing in conditions is when those conditions lead to aquaplaning, and that can be very dangerous. And we've seen that also in the past. You can think back to many occasions in the past where conditions were so bad that you go along the straight, you're simply going along the straight. You're not even turning, you're not even braking, you're going along the straight, and then all of a sudden you hit a puddle of water. The car gets, on top of that water, basically. Tires do not touch the ground anymore, and you just spin out. So you can't have that, clearly. But as long as it's possible for the drivers to control the cars, they should go racing. There's no question about that, I think.
For me, it's more a question of the fact that they can't see. They don't have wipers. You saw the spray that the tires caused from the cars in front of it. They did some tests with covers in the recent past, and they decided against it, putting covers over the tires in a wet race like this. But the point is just this: Max Verstappen set one fastest lap after the other because he was in front. He had no spray in front of him. So the spray and the lack of visibility to me is almost more important than the aquaplaning. Aquaplaning is quite obvious that you need to you can't control the car whether you can see or not. The point is, if you can't see and something happens in front of you, to me, it becomes a bit dangerous. I maybe used a bit of a strong word there, but the point is that makes it a bit dicey for me. Yeah,
There is
sure.
no driver that can say, let's stop the race because I cannot see where I'm going.
All right, yeah, no, I suppose that getting paid the big bucks, to do these crazy things, I get that. But like you just said, Lando spun out after the restart behind the safety car because he probably misjudged his turning point, and that basically cost him the championship, if you ask me. But I wanted to talk to you about Max, the fact that he's an exceptional driver, probably one of the best ever. But the role that luck played in this victory, and the fact that two Alpines were on the podium with him, shows you how much of a role luck actually played here. How much of it do you think is down to the red flag regulations being outdated or antiquated? Maybe they should be updated and not allowing teams to work on the cars, change tires, and the likes.
Well, we've had that debate also for a long time in Formula One. I remember a particular race somewhere in Monaco somewhere, and I think there were like 10 or 15 laps left, and there was a red flag, and then everybody could come into the pits, and it was a brilliant race building up for the lead. I think Jenson Button was part of that even still. So this must have been somewhere 2009, around about there. And then the red flag in Monaco, and then everybody could change tires, and then the whole battle to the at the front petered out. And I was very, very strongly opinionated about that. They should change this. Now, okay, 15 years later, they haven't changed that yet, and I think it's one of those things that where when it doesn't work for you, you complain about it. When it does work for you, you don't complain about it. And so what happens basically, as things happen in life, they even out over a course of a season or over a period of time. Sometimes you benefit from it, sometimes you don't benefit from it, and sometimes it works against you, and sometimes it works for you. So that means exactly the same. But yeah, I think and in conditions like these, luck does play a role. Yes, absolutely. Some of the drivers, such as excuse me, some of the drivers, such as George Russell, for instance, argued against coming in for a change against his team, because he says, I could see there's a red flag coming. I could see the conditions are such that there's a red flag coming. Somebody's going to throw the car off into the wall, and we're going to have a red flag. I don't want to come in. And the team forced him basically to come in. The trouble with Norris was apparently that his tires were so worn that he had to basically come in, and that was 2 laps before the red flag, if memory serves. So yeah, it depends really on and I think Max said the same thing. He also said that, and his team agreed with him. Let's stay out. There is likely to be a red flag, and the only way we can really get to the front is if there is a red flag, and we can get a free tire change. They saw that thing developing. So luck, but also I think some experience and some insight from the drivers to decide, am I going to come in, or depending on my tires, the conditions of my tires, am I going to come in? Should I maybe stay out and gamble on there being a red flag, because the rain could have eased as well. That gamble could have gone the other way. So yeah, luck does play a role, obviously, and sometimes it goes your way, and sometimes it doesn't go your way. But in this case, Max and some other drivers made the right call, including the 2 Alpine drivers, made the right call. One can argue that Alpine was so slow anyway that they didn't wear their tires down, so they didn't need to come in. But that's I think being unkind. The fact that Alpine were there or thereabouts. Is one of the situations that proves that in the rain anything can happen, and the rain is a great leveler. That even if you are a slow car and it rains, you can be amongst the front runners, because the rain and the wet conditions determine your performance, not the track, not the dry conditions, not the track, and the pure performance of your car. It's the wet conditions. So that's the factor that allowed the 2 Alpines to be there. And of course, then they made the right call in terms of the red flag and free tire change.
I read somewhere this week that it said that in a dry race, the team makes the strategy calls, but in a wet race, the driver makes the strategy calls because he knows what's going on. And like you just mentioned, Russell was livid for being basically forced to come into the pits, and it cost him the race. And I think I hear what you said, and Andreas Sella said afterwards that he wasn't comfortable letting Lando stay out there with tires that were that worn. So it's because then you could have spun out anyway and lost the race that way. But talking about the drivers now making this kind of decisions and being up to the job, Martin Brundle said about Lando Norris that he doesn't seem to have the killer instinct yet. I have to emphasize yet, because he's not experienced at, running at the front of the grid, being contention for the championship and the likes. He still needs to get used to that kind of pressure. Max has now been doing it for many years. He's now probably going to be the quadruple world champion, 4 in a row. So he's used to the pressure, and he's always been good at pressure. Lando seems to be a little bit more fragile in terms of handling pressure.
Yes, I think again, and we've spoken about this. It's got to do with their mentalities and their mental strength. The hunger. I think Max is probably the hungriest of the lot. Of the current field, because he has it within his grasp to win his 4th title. And I would argue this would be the first title that he really deserves. And that's a different discussion. because this year he really showed what he could do, and that he for this season he drove like a champion, like the champion he is. But I would argue that the previous two were basically very much thanks to the fact that he had the best car. Yes, he still had to maximize it. I've always argued that if you have the best car, you still have to maximize it, and you still have a teammate to beat, which he did. And I would argue that his first title in 2021 was actually not that well deserved, because it happened due to a mistake by the FIA in the final race. So this year, Max certainly showed that he deserves the title, and when he wins it, he will be a well-deserved 2024 champion, and with the caveats, of course, that on some occasions he didn't really act like a champion. We had that discussion two weeks ago. But yes, Norris, whatever happened up to now, I don't think he was a deserving champion. Too many mistakes by both the team and the driver. Yes, they were inexperienced, both McLaren and Lando, obviously inexperienced in terms of being in the fight for a championship. And let's not forget, McLaren has not quite done it yet. I mean, there are still 3 races to go. And if I can get my notes together, there are still 147 points to go in the Constructors' Championship. They are only leading by 36, McLaren. So it's certainly not done yet. That battle is still going to continue, I reckon, until the end of the season in Abu Dhabi. Whereas I think the Drivers' Championship will probably be decided in Las Vegas in 2 weeks from now.
Well, one thing we do know about the remaining races, like you just said, Las Vegas, Qatar, and Abu Dhabi, it's not going to rain. So the McLaren looks fast. I mean, it won the sprint race on Saturday comfortably. So in the drive, the McLaren looks good. Ferrari has stopped updating their car. Red Bull has got a few updates coming through. It's going to be down to the wire. You said if Max outscores Lando by 3 points this weekend, he's the champion. This coming weekend in Las Vegas.
There are lots of permutations. I've seen a piece now with about 15 or maybe even more than that permutations of what can happen. But the fact is that at the moment, the lead is 62 points. After Las Vegas, there will be only 60 points on the table. So if Max leads Lando by 60 points after Las Vegas, he will be the champion, because he has more wins. So that means for Norris to try and avoid that, he's got to try and prevent Max from leading by 60 points or more. So he needs to take, he's leading by 62 now, so Norris needs to take at least 3 points off him to make it 59 points after Las Vegas, to have a very, very slim hope of making it. Again, there are many, many other permutations. I mean, the Ferraris are there. They're going to be very fast in Las Vegas, I reckon. McLaren, they're going to be back with their fast rear wing, I think, in Las Vegas, which they couldn't use in the wet conditions last weekend in Sao Paulo. So they're going to be competitive. Qatar is a pretty competitive event or track, I think, for both Ferrari and McLaren. I'm not quite sure that the Red Bull is up there again. I think they're still not quite the fastest in dry conditions, in normal conditions. But still, if Max wins the race in Las Vegas, doesn't matter what happens with Norris. All he has to do is win the race in Las Vegas. Then he's got the championship.
Yeah. Well, Las Vegas.
Even if he finishes second and he's ahead of Norris, if Norris is third, he will also still take it.
3 points difference, yeah.
Yeah, so basically what Max needs to do is finish first or second, even third, I think, depending on who gets the fastest point. That's where we will get into all the permutations. But I think Max can finish either first, second, or third with Norris behind him to take the championship. Probably even fourth if you think about it. But anyway, so it's as simple as that. He needs to, obviously, if he finishes ahead of Norris, basically, in the higher positions, then it's done. If 9th and 10th, it's not quite done. But yeah.
The interesting thing about this weekend, though, for McLaren is they at least managed to increase their lead, like you just mentioned, to 36 points over Ferrari. But Las Vegas is a strong Ferrari circuit. The Ferraris won 2 out of the last 3 races now. That's going to be something to watch. It's going to be interesting. Like you just said, that's going to go down right down to the wire.
Yeah, absolutely. It's and McLaren said, I've seen a quote from from Stella that is, they're not too concerned about the fact that they are probably not going to win the Drivers' Championship because they've always been focused on winning the Constructors' Championship. I think that's probably true from the team's point of view, but I think they would certainly have tried their very best to win the Drivers' Championship as well. But they've made a few mistakes in that regard. I think if you think back to Hungary, where they swapped the two around, and I think where was the other one? They also swapped, or it was at Monza where they finished second and third behind Leclerc. Where they should have swapped the two around as well. That gap of 62 points could have been, I don't know, 52 points, and then it's a little bit more realistic. So, yeah, I think McLaren is very much focused on trying to win the championship. And if they do, I think they will be the deserving Constructors' champions because they certainly came back from how far back last season they were. And they have been the one that absolutely easily won the development war in the Constructors' Championship this season. So they will be well deserved. But again, 100 and what was it? 147 points to go. We saw what happened with Williams last weekend. They lost both their cars. They couldn't score at all. We saw what happened with Alpine, as we mentioned. They were nowhere. Where were they? Ninth, I think, before the event. Now all of a sudden they're up into sixth. Makes something like $30 million difference in their
Yes.
payout if they remain in sixth because that battle for sixth, and it maybe sounds a little bit silly to think about that, but if you look at the battle for sixth, you've got Alpine on 49, you've got Haas on 46, you've got RB on 44. So those three teams are battling for sixth position, and that sixth position can be worth as much as $30 million in terms of their payout or their prize money. So that's a huge battle for those three teams to be involved with. And that's also another subtext of what's going to happen until the end of the season.
Someone else I wanted to talk to you about, that a driver, a world champion, 7 times world champion, 8 times in some people's eyes. Now I'm really stirring. Yeah. Hamilton looked so unhappy. I mean, the only time he was happy this entire weekend when he was driving Ayrton Senna's 1990 F1 car. And that was exceptional. That noise, that sound of that car. I mean, we missed that, don't we?
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's now stories going around that he might have finished, that might have been his last race for Mercedes. I doubt it. But I mean, he's really fed up. I'm sure he can't wait to get into a Ferrari next year because that Ferrari is actually a potentially race winning car in this year's form anyway. So something to look forward to, but he's fed up with that Mercedes, isn't he?
Yeah. No, that's absolutely clear. I think we should also take into account that George Russell has far more motivation, I think, to perform well because he's going to be the team leader at Mercedes next year, with Antonelli coming in. So he, he's laying the groundwork and he's doing it well. I think he's doing it exceptionally well. He's outperforming Lewis Hamilton this year. That car is a bit of a dog, to put it mildly. And I think what we also saw this season is that they have been experimenting a lot, and most of those experiments were carried out by Lewis over every race weekend. So often, he had some bits that George didn't have, or they had to run comparisons. So therefore, the performance of specifically Lewis's car wasn't quite the way that they expected. Something worked, or it may not have worked. And we can also remember that this car was a winning car at some point this season. And I think all of this is simply a manifestation, I think, of what I've already mentioned on a number of occasions, the development war and how things closed up. So what you're going to see, obviously, if things are very close in terms of the performance of these cars, and we're going to see much more of that next year, is that on one weekend the one team will be fast, on another weekend that same team will not be competitive, and that's the way that things are going to happen. We're seeing it now. Some individual drivers are going to be competitive, and some of maybe their teammates will not be competitive because of small little things that make a difference in maybe the setup of the car or whatever little upgrade they can get to the car. Things are going to be much more mixed up, I think, next year, and we're seeing part of that now. Yes, Lewis, I think, has already checked out. I don't think he's going to. Obviously, he's going to end the season at Mercedes. He's said that many times. He's part of the family. He wants to finish with them, and he's had such a long history since I think the age of 12 that he's had a history with Mercedes. So it's not a question of just opening the door and leaving. He's going to finish the season, and don't be surprised if there's one or two strong performances from him again this season. But he has already said that this car is undrivable, that he cannot wait to get rid of the W15. In fact, he also said, I think last weekend, he can't wait for Christmas. So yeah, I think he's very much looking forward to Ferrari, to joining Ferrari. And that was obviously another debating point. I think we mentioned it last week. Would Ferrari have been better off to stay with Carlos Sainz? But anyway, so that's a different discussion.
You mentioned Franco Colapinto, and he had so many Brazilian supporters in that Brazilian Grand Prix. Apparently, the flights were sold out from Argentina to Sao Paulo. There were so many of them. The lady doing the interviews on the truck when they're going around the track, she said to Lando, "But they're shouting your name." She said, "It's not Lando. They're shouting Franco."
Franco.
So listen carefully.
Yeah,
he was so popular, but he was shown up to be the rookie that he is a little bit. I mean, it's exceptionally difficult conditions. But I felt so sorry for Williams. They lost 3 cars in one day, and they managed to rebuild Colapinto's car in time, but they couldn't do Albon's. Albon had such a good qualifying, and then Colapinto went and crashed it again. That team is on the back foot a little bit more than we expected. Budget-wise, they must be under extreme pressure, don't you think?
Oh yeah, I mean, this was where it was a $30 million weekend for Alpine. It was probably into the millions for Williams negatively, costs. In terms of car repairs. So, and it's the end of the season, close to the end of the budget cap limits and stuff like that. So, yeah, I think, unfortunately for them, Williams not working well. Franco Colapinto made a mistake in the wet, but let's not forget that he's not the only one that made a mistake. People like Carlos Sainz made a mistake. People like Charles Leclerc made a mistake. Lando Norris made a few mistakes. He didn't end up in the wall, but he did make a few mistakes. It's very easy to make mistakes. Lance Stroll, experienced driver, maybe not one of the best ever, but an experienced driver, made a mistake, more than one mistake, in the wet conditions. So for a rookie in only, what is it, his third or fourth race, in these conditions, atrocious conditions, to end up in the wall, it's not to be expected, but it is not unexpected, and I don't think it reflects badly on him at all. I think he's already shown in the races where he did not put the car in the wall that he knows what he's doing and that he's an up and coming racer. And unfortunately, I seem to the indications seem to be that he's not a shoe in for a race seat next year. Apparently, the Sauber team have now decided they're going to fill that second seat with the Formula 2 championship leader, Gabriel Bartoletto. That's not been announced yet and not been confirmed yet, but all indications are. So that's a door closed for Colapinto, just going back to him. And who knows, maybe he can find a seat at Red Bull. Maybe Christian Horner is sufficiently impressed that he would put Colapinto in Sergio Perez's place. But that's a very, very long shot. So
out of the frying pan into the fire.
I think Colapinto is probably going to end up as a reserve driver for one of the top teams next year.
My feeling is, I still wouldn't be surprised if Carlos Sainz ends up in Red Bull and Colapinto stays on at Williams, some sort of a deal being made, give him another year in a Williams, something like that. Or if that doesn't happen, then Perez is going to get demoted, fired. Lawson or Tsunoda, but probably Lawson's going to move up to Red Bull, and Colapinto is going to slot into the RBs. I think he's going to race next year.
That's a good call. I would certainly not be surprised by that. I can't argue that.
Yeah, I was just surprised about Perez. I had the idea that he might still end up at Sauber. Long history of that team, experienced driver, unique experienced driver, cool heads. Him and Hulkenberg, they've got a bit of history, but it would have been a good move. I wanted to ask you something else. We talked about Max and the press. That's something that we haven't discussed yet. We've now talked about the racing. Let's talk about what happened after the race. Max sitting in the press conference and says, "Where's the British media?" Sort of like implying something that the media is biased against him or prejudiced against him. Is there any truth to that, do you think?
Well, he's not only implying that, but he said that, and he said that previously when the criticism about his driving in Austin and Mexico City nailed for that by mainly, I think, the British press. Unfortunately, I don't understand French. I don't understand Italian. I obviously have a bit of an understanding of what the Dutch of Dutch, but I do not have regular insights from non-English language media. So it's difficult to say whether the British media or the English language media, particularly biased against Max, because I don't know whether the Italian or the German or the French or the other languages may be. But I think it's a little bit unfair, to put it mildly, for the Verstappens. And I see Jos has also jumped onto this bandwagon, criticizing let's say the English language press, not necessarily the British press, but the English language press for their criticism against Max for the incidents in both Austin and Mexico City. They seem to feel or to think that when you criticize a driver for specific incidents on the track, then you are generally against him. Then you criticize him for his general behavior behind the wheel, or his abilities behind the wheel, and that therefore you are biased against him, and that obviously is not the case. Let's not forget that the criticism against Max on the two previous occasions was aimed at his defense of a position, his unorthodox way of defending, and some would say unsportsmanlike, I would say unsportsmanlike, defense of a position by simply, running the opposition on the outside off the track, which is unacceptable. That does not mean that we are criticizing his behavior behind the wheel. We are criticizing I'm criticizing particular maneuvers that he makes behind the wheel, and I would continue to do that. And I would say that that sort of behavior, when he's under pressure, when he's being attacked, and he takes his line of defense over the line of sportsmanlike and fairness, then that is not acceptable. That does not mean that I do not appreciate his ability behind the wheel. I have just said in this broadcast, I've just said that he is a world-class driver. I've said that on many occasions. The guy has got more talent and ability in his little finger than most other drivers in Formula One's history. So to lay against or lay into the English language media, and let's include ourselves in that, just for criticizing certain incidents in which Max acted unacceptably, in my view, that is missing the point, and they should understand that. The Verstappen seem to be very thin-skinned when there's any criticism leveled against either Max or Jos or the team, and the same goes for Helmut Marko as well, I would argue. Criticism, when it's valid, should be accepted. If it's valid criticism, accept it. It's constructive. It's the way you learn. It's the way that you can improve. You can always improve. Nobody's perfect. Not even Max Verstappen is perfect. And he should be willing to learn. He's young enough that he should know that you can still learn. So I was maybe not angry, but I was disappointed, and I was, let's say, pissed off by how the Verstappens, both of them, reacted to the criticism, and now to gleefully say, yes, where's the British press or where's the English language press now that I've shown what I can do. We've always understood and we've always acknowledged what he can do behind the wheel, and anybody who knows anything about Formula One would be silly to argue that he doesn't know what he's doing behind the wheel.
Yeah, no, he's got a bit of a blind spot in that sense. In his eyes, he hasn't done anything wrong. But to me, it was a bit of the pinnacle of hypocrisy this weekend when he called out over the radio, the guy didn't leave me a car
Yes,
with.
it was Leclerc.
I thought, yeah, really, Max?
Yes,
Where's that coming from
absolutely.
now?
Yeah, he didn't leave his space. He pushed me wide. He did this. He did that. I mean, come on, Max. That's exactly what you did.
Yeah.
When you did that, that was not wrong. I think it's also hypocritical for them to call out race control for waiting for 40 seconds for the red flag to be called, whereas Max benefited really from a mistake by race control in the 2021 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Again, things sometimes happen in your favor, and sometimes they don't happen in your favor. They go against you. So, in all those cases, one can argue that those calls were made in good faith. In Abu Dhabi's case, I would argue it was made in good faith, but it was a mistake. In this case, calling the red flag in qualifying, which stopped Max from doing another lap and caused him to end up eventually 17th on the grid. They took that long because they wanted to see whether that car could be moved by its own steam. So, and he wouldn't have had any other chance anyway to do another lap because it normally takes about 10 seconds for them to call the flag. There was only 1 minute and 37 seconds left on the clock. There was no way that he was going to be able to do another lap anyway. So, that outburst was completely uncalled for. And I think that was part of the whole pressure situation that he found himself in at the beginning of the weekend. And afterwards, everything was fine.
One last driver I wanted to talk to you about, one that got introduced to the harsh realities of Formula One, and that's the super sub, Ollie Bearman. He stood in for Carlos Sainz when he had his appendix removed, if I remember correctly. And now this weekend again, Magnussen was ill. He stepped up to the plate. He did what he could do, but he struggled in that race. I mean, he was up and down, yo-yoed. I mean, but invaluable experience, don't you think?
Yes. Yeah, and obviously, the Haas car probably wasn't all that competitive anyway. So something for him to learn from. And Ollie Bearman is going to learn a lot before he becomes a truly competitive driver, which I believe he will be. I don't think he's going to spend the rest of his life at Haas. And once he gets into a more competitive car, and after some years of experience, he will certainly be one of the top drivers in Formula One. All the indications are there. These are rookies. Sometimes they have it up and down. It's a huge jump from Formula 2 to Formula One. It's not just something that you jump in and you perform. Unlike Max Verstappen, which he did.
Yeah, because he's exceptional
He
talent.
didn't even jump from Formula 2.
True.
For Ollie Bearman to see some of the realities in Formula, that's part of the learning curve.
I think he's benefited greatly from this because now, most other, like Bartoletta, next to, let's say, he goes and drives Ferrari or Sauber. It's going to go from Formula 2 to Formula 1 and has to learn on the run or on the fly as he gets along. Bearman is now 3 races that he's managed to race, if I'm not mistaken. It's gonna play a big role in his success things. But I wanted to ask you one last question. Sorry, I keep saying that, but it really irks me. I need to get this out there. What on earth is Lance Stroll still doing in Formula One? I know his dad's got all the money, and I know his dad owns the team. But really, man, there are more deserving drivers. I felt so sorry for Felipe Dragovic. He's been trundling along for how many years now as a reserve driver. He's as talented a driver as any of these other young guys, but it's never going to get the opportunity. It's a disgrace to you, if you ask me.
Yeah, well, it is. There are certain situations in Formula One that are not right. They are not right, and that is one of them. Lance Stroll, he's not an incompetent driver. He's not just there because his daddy's got the money, because his daddy owns the team. He can handle a Formula One car. He's often shown that he can. He's exceptionally good at getting away from the line. His best racing is often just after the start. He can take 4 or 5 positions after the start. And let's not forget, he's been on the podium before. But the fact is that there are better drivers. And I suspect that Lawrence will not let him go before the team is in a position to challenge for the championship, both the Constructors' Championship and possibly for the Drivers' Championship. And they are certainly not there yet. They've been going backwards this whole season. They're going to not be in a competitive position at the beginning next year. Who knows what's going to happen next year, because there's not going to be so much scope in the development battle next year. They have Fernando Alonso for the next year or two. And possibly after him, they can get somebody else in there. But as long as they're not competitive, Lance will have that seat and he will be safe in that seat. That's the one situation in Formula One that I think is not good. The other situation in Formula One is that that there are 2 teams owned by one owner. I don't think it's good for Formula One to have 2 teams owned by one entity. That's Red Bull and the current the current RB. They're going to change to Racing Bulls next year, I believe. but it's not good to have one owner that have 4 cars, 2 teams, in principle. And I think that's wrong in principle. This could be an exception because wrong and basically rescued 2 teams from going down. But that was 20 years ago.
Yeah, literally 20 years ago.
Yeah, so one should, that situation should not be allowed. I don't know how you can untangle that because I don't think you can force anybody to go out. But anyway, so those, as far as I'm concerned, are the 2 unacceptable bigger situations in Formula One.
I just want to add this last note there. I mean, they went from an exceptionally good name, Toro Rosso, which is Italian for Red Bull, to a very weird name, AlphaTauri. Now they went to an acronym VCORP, and now they're jumping into Racing Bulls. I mean, really, this is a marketing company. Red Bull is built around marketing. Can you not come up with a better name? Really, that's ridiculous. But anyway, enough said about that. Thanks, Hendrik. That was a lekker conversation. I appreciate it.